Last weekend, a swarm of explosive drones took off from Lebanon and flew towards an Israeli military camp. Piloted by Hezbollah militants, the drones flew over farms, over a couple of villages, some Israeli settlements before finally approaching their target. As they flew, the sky was filled with streaks of light.
Rocket fire dots the night sky on Israel's border with Lebanon. The distant boom of missiles heralding a new and incredibly dangerous moment in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, Israeli fighter jets flew into Lebanon, attacking Hezbollah bases.
The IDF is striking terror targets in Lebanon, from which Hezbollah was planning to launch their attacks on Israeli civilians.
But the Hezbollah drones kept going until they finally arrived at the Israeli barracks. This wasn't the first time that bases in this area had been targeted. 3 weeks earlier, 18 Israeli soldiers had been injured in another drone strike. This time, the Israelis were ready and they were able to shoot down the drones before they hit their mark. But here's a weird thing though. This base I'm talking about, the Rawiyah barracks, it's not in Israel, at least not according to the United Nations. Another weird thing, right across the road from the barracks is a big official sign that says Trump Heights. It's a settlement named after Donald Trump. In fact, in this part of the world, the Golan Heights, almost everything is weird. The geography, the demographics, everything. The world is watching this pocket of land closely because the increasing hostility between Israel and the heavily armed Iranian-backed militia group Hezbollah has the potential to trigger a massive Middle East conflict.
Hezbollah is a formidable foe with more than 150,000 rockets in its arsenal.
Plus, it's at the centre of a personal relationship that is more important now than ever. The relationship between Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Today, the story of this very strange corner of the globe, and why you need to know about it right now. I'm Bevan, and this is If You're Listening. This story goes way back, and it starts with water.
It's the place where Jesus is said to have walked on water and spread loaves and fishes to feed the multitudes.
Sorry, not that far back. Yes, it is the same place, but it's a little bit more recent.
In more recent times, the Sea of Galilee became the promised land to thousands of Jewish immigrants.
When the State of Israel was established in 1947, its only source of fresh surface water was the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, which feeds into it.
And towering over it all, the Golan Heights. When the Arabs declared war on Israel in 1948, this forbidding piece of land was part of Syria.
If Israel had any other option, they probably would have abandoned the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee. But they needed this water. See, it doesn't really rain in Israel.
For Israel, the river represents 500 million cubic meters of precious water flowing to waste every year into the Dead Sea.
The Syrians had artillery positioned up on the Golan Heights plateau. They wanted the Israeli state destroyed, and they decided that they would make life hell for anyone within range.
For 19 years, they shelled Israeli towns and kibbutz in the valley below.
Fighting over this water supply continued for years, sometimes in the form of warring infrastructure projects, sometimes with actual bombs. By 1967, Syria in particular was so angry about it all that they joined an Egyptian-led invasion of Israel. It went badly for them.
In 6 incredible days, the Arab nations are totally, utterly defeated.
Israeli tanks drove up the hill onto the plateau of the Golan Heights and captured it.
The drive into Syria stops just short of Damascus.
I can imagine how this triumph would have gone down in the Israeli cabinet. This would have come as a massive relief to the Israeli water minister. Now his dam and pumping projects wouldn't be constantly at risk of being bombed. But the rest of the Israeli cabinet would have been a bit less jazzed about the whole thing. The Golan Heights wasn't particularly desirable to them. It was farmland with no particular religious significance, and while most of the Syrian population fled during the war, the few that remained were a peculiarity. They weren't Muslims or Christians or Jews, but members of a secretive religion that borrows from all three, the Druze. Many of the Druze that didn't flee never saw their families again, except across the valley from the Shouting Hill.
These Arabs from the Golan have gathered for a funeral at a place they call the Shouting Hill.
It's called the Shouting Hill because if you shout or use a megaphone, people gathered across the border in Syria can hear you. They conduct funerals like this so that their Syrian relatives can attend.
The family split in two when Israel took over the Golan.
The Druze are mostly farmers.
The Druze of Majul Shams make a reasonable living off the land, just as they've always done. But their land is still occupied, taken over by a state they want no part of.
And more than half a century after the Six-Day War, if you look at the area on a map, it is a mess. Disputed borders run everywhere. Some of it is claimed by Lebanon, other parts by Syria, all of it by Israel. Some Israeli settlers have moved in, but many of the attempts to start new communities fail. The Golan is also covered in Israeli military bases that don't show up on the maps. On Israeli satellite images, they are blurred or sometimes photoshopped to look like farmland. You can see them on non-Israeli maps though. They're all over the place. These military bases are there because Israel is worried that Syria might try and reclaim the region, or that the militant group Hezbollah will attack it out of spite, which they have done many times. Meanwhile, Israel has offered the Druze who live there Israeli citizenship, but few take them up on it. They live in a strange limbo. Syrian citizens living under occupation. The United Nations, by the way, agrees with that description of them. It has refused to recognise Israeli sovereignty over the land that Israel invaded. The UN isn't a big fan of invasions. Only Israel thinks that it's part of their territory. No one else recognises their claim, or at least they didn't until this happened.
The Golan Heights is something I've been hearing about for a long time.
Now, ordinarily, I would tell a story like this by doing most of the talking and dropping in Donald Trump as needed to help me along.
Great job, thank you.
The story of what President Donald Trump did in 2019 with
the Golan Heights,
well, it calls for something a bit different.
It's a whole different story today, folks.
Because in a speech to the Republican Jewish coalition at the time, Donald Trump laid this whole story out, step by step.
For 52 years, they wanted recognition from the United States on the Golan Heights.
So this is Trump's version of how it all went down, which obviously paints him as a big cartoon hero.
Thank you very much.
But otherwise, it does actually seem to be pretty much what happened.
They had 32 summits, meetings, big meetings over many, many decades about the Golan Heights.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had told Trump about the Golan Heights a few times. But in 2019, the US ambassador to Israel called the White House and said Netanyahu was asking again for Trump to recognise the Golan as part of Israel. So Trump decided to get educated.
I said, fellas, do me a favour. Give me a little history, quick. I want to go fast. Give me a quickie.
The ambassador explained the strategic significance of the Golan Heights.
He starts going, well, we need that. It's the high point. We need it for protection. We need it for... I said, all right, good. How do you like the idea? They weren't even calling about this. How do you like the idea of me recognizing exactly what we're discussing? Because I agree, you need it. You need the height. You need the height.
The ambassador was surprised.
He says, guy, like a wonderful, beautiful baby. He said, you would do that, sir? I said, yeah, I think I'm doing it right now. Let's write something out.
When he says, let's write something out, he means a tweet. He scrawled it on a piece of paper and handed it to his Twitter guy to post.
We have breaking news. President Trump has just committed to the Golan Heights. And it was a big, big story for 2 days. Everyone's happy. No repercussions. No, and there won't be. And we're there to protect Israel, so there won't be.
Everyone's happy. No repercussions.
And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has unveiled a new settlement in the Golan Heights named after the US President Donald Trump.
It wasn't really a new settlement. It was an old, failed settlement with 10 people living in it that Netanyahu was hoping would take off if he put Trump's name on it. So why did Trump make this massive foreign policy change on a random Thursday afternoon? Well, the simple answer is that he did it to help Benjamin Netanyahu, who at the time was facing a tough battle for re-election.
How is the race going, by the way? How is it? Who's going to win the race? Tell me. I don't know. Well, it's going to be close.
He saw a chance to do something to help his friend Bibi win an election. Simple.
We have never had a greater friend than President Trump.
But actually, Trump didn't really care whether Netanyahu or his opponent Benny Gantz won.
Two good people. Two good people.
But he also undoubtedly did think that it would help Netanyahu electorally. So then why did he do it? Well, Trump doesn't do favours. He does deals. He scratched Netanyahu's back, thinking that Netanyahu would flip around and scratch his. Trump implemented all sorts of policies that helped Netanyahu politically. He moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He brokered deals to establish relations between Israel and 3 formerly hostile states. First with the United Arab Emirates, then with Bahrain, and then just a week before the 2020 US presidential election, a deal was done between Israel and Sudan.
This will be the 3rd country where we're doing this.
Trump announced the deal on a conference call from the Oval Office.
On the phone, we have some terrific people, Chairman Abdel Al-Burhan and Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok of Sudan, a beautiful part of the world, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think you mostly know him.
And for very Trumpy reasons, with the Sudanese leaders on the phone and the press watching, he decided to test Netanyahu's loyalty. Call in that back scratch.
Do you think Sleepy Joe could have made this deal, baby? Sleepy Joe. I think, do you think he would have made this deal somehow? I don't think so.
There's a long silence.
Well, Mr. President, one thing I can tell you is...
Trump's face breaks into a cheeky grin, anticipating the answer.
We appreciate the help for peace from anyone in America, and we appreciate what you've done enormously.
Yeah.
Womp womp. Netanyahu is on the side of anyone who can help him and help Israel. When Joe Biden won the election, Netanyahu was the first to call him and congratulate him on the victory. Trump didn't speak to him again for more than 3 years, telling Axios, and language warning on this,
Nobody did more for Bibi, and I liked Bibi. I still like Bibi, but I also like loyalty. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. Come.
Okie dokie then. A lot of people remember the friendship between these two men, not the F him that followed. There were stories just this year that Trump and Netanyahu were conspiring to delay a peace deal with Hamas until after the US election to try and prevent it from helping Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's campaign, but that was denied by both sides and eventually retracted by the reporter. Netanyahu is on his own, and the situation he's in is very complex. On the 27th of July this year, a rocket hit a football pitch in the Druze village of Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights. 12 Druze children were killed. Hezbollah usually boasts about it when they blow stuff up, but this time they denied it was them.
Thousands of mourners filled the narrow streets of Majd al-Shams, surrounding the small white caskets of young children and teenagers, killed whilst playing together, the youngest just 10 years old.
If it was Hezbollah that fired the rocket, it's unlikely this village was their target. It's much more likely that they were aiming for one of those blurry Israeli bases and missed. The community in Majd al-Shams asked Israeli government ministers not to come to the funeral, but several still came. The Druze villagers screamed at them until they left. Many of the villagers wanted revenge for the horrific attack, but others feared for what would come after that.
I'm afraid for the consequences. If this happened yesterday, what about tomorrow if it happens, if it gets to an all-out war?
In retaliation, Israel bombed an apartment building in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. killing the Hezbollah commander that they say was responsible for the attack. But think about this. Imagine if this does escalate into an all-out war in the Golan Heights. That's the prospect that has people around the world watching this patch of land closely, on edge. Israel would see a war against Hezbollah as a justifiable act of self-defence. Losing control of the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee is an existential threat for them. Thanks to Donald Trump's attempted quid pro quo, the United States would agree with Israel. It's self-defence. After all,
you need the hype. You need the hype.
But that means you've got the US-backed Israeli army fighting Iranian-backed Lebanese militants among Druze villages and illegal Israeli settlements on what most of the world thinks is illegally occupied Syrian land. If you thought the Gaza war was a political minefield, wait until it kicks off in the Golan Heights.